Welcome to the South Coast Artist Index Gallery X Documentation Project Series, hosted by Sean FitzGerald. The project is the first phase of an agenda to scan Gallery X's entire collection of documents, including news clippings, posters, flyers, photographs, and more. The scans will be archived and later mined for information specific to the artists who have had their work exhibited or who have performed at the city's oldest continually operating cooperative art gallery. Join Sean and his guests as they discuss the project and the history of Gallery X, its visual, performing, and literary artist members and volunteers.
Good. Hello and welcome to the South Coast Artist Index Gallery X Documentation Project. I'm your host, Sean G. FitzGerald, and I'm here today with a man who has been integral to the Gallery X landscape, if you will, over the last 35 years. He's been a staple in the art community here, and it's an honor to have him with us. And I'd like to turn the microphone over and have him introduce himself.
Well, thank you, Sean. My name's Don Wilkinson. I'm New Bedford born, 1959, so I'm getting my Social Security check soon.
You've been taking advantage of that for a while, I guess.
Growing up in New Bedford, I left briefly when I was a teenager. Had a very, very brief time in the U.S. Air Force before returning back to New Bedford and deciding to go to the Swain School of Design. Mm-hmm. Swain is absolutely integral to the creation of Gallery X, and Gallery X's origins is absolutely integral to the art community that followed and thrives so much in New Bedford. So I can talk a little bit about how Gallery X came about. Much of this has to do, perhaps more than any other figure. Certainly the person most identified with Gallery X is Chuck Houck, and rightfully so. Chuck was contacted at some time in the late 80s, I guess, mm-hmm. to invite a number of local artists to participate in a fundraiser for the Ernestina. Mm-hmm. A few months later, wheels were turning, and how do we do something that's more than just a one-shot, a one-month show? Mm-hmm. Chuck and John Neiman, who I don't even believe were at Swain at exactly the same time. Mm-hmm. At Swain, I think John came in after Chuck had graduated. I think he came in after I graduated, but I may have my dates wrong a little bit. Mm-hmm. A group of people, Chuck and John in particular, reached out to people they knew in the Swain community. And I was in New Bedford then, attending grad school at the University of Massachusetts, getting a master's degree in printmaking and visual design. And I was invited to go. I got deeply involved in Gallery X, as did many other people. And that small group of people who started it may have numbered 20 to 25 people. Almost all, but not all, were graduates of the Swain School of Design. There were a few notable exceptions. Bob Maker, who's a local historian, was very integral to the beginning. Karen McGowan was her name then. Her name has changed a few times over the years. She was back then sort of a punk poet with a mohawk, and probably the youngest among the group.
Nice.
There are a few others that whose names I don't recall off the top of my head. But we formed a pretty interesting group of people, and we just tried to figure out how to make a gallery work. And the first space was on Spring Street. Often told story about how the gallery got its name, mm-hmm. and that was called Gallery X because of its proximity to the Y, WCA, and the Z.
That makes sense.
So in that space, we stayed in for a number of years. early members included Barbara Worthington and Pam Power and Diane Canoia and Richard Vanasse. Some of the people who were there in the beginning have long since passed. There's a community there that started Gallery X that knew each other very intimately, and that had much to do with how small the Swain School of Design was. In 1982, the year I graduated Swain, there were 33 people in my class.
Wow.
The entire school, freshmen through seniors, never numbered much more than 130 people total. Unlike most colleges, there were no dorms, at least not until the last year or two prior to the merger with SMU. So everyone roomed with everyone else.
Cool.
All our social life was in people's apartments. The school was very intimate. There was virtually no clear line between faculty and students socially.
Nice.
We all intermingled all the time. Much of the faculty were only a few years older than the students.
Must have helped with the creative process, I imagine.
It did. And there's, this whole idea about a family tree at Swain and in other institutions, but David Leffler Smith, who probably has more to do with how successful Swain became than any other figure, was the son of a New York painter, and he came aboard in 1962 or thereabouts, and quickly he came in as an administrator, but his love was never at the administration level. He really was a painter and draftsman, and he sought out colleagues to come in and take other positions as they became available. So he recruited people to this small school. David studied with Hans Hofmann, John Osborne, who became a printmaking instructor there, studied with David Hockney. So there was some pedigree coming into the school that was sort of unexpected and delightful.
Yeah.
For such a small school, we had major players come in to give lectures. The designer Milton Glazier, Robert Nero Sr., who was a well-known painter and who did not like to talk about his son back in the day, and many other designers, painters, and sculptors. One of my favorite stories at Swain had to do when I was a work-study student, and I was asked to drive the school van out to New York City and hit a bunch of galleries and pick up, I had a list, go to this gallery to get this Rauschenberg print, and go to this gallery to pick up a Warhol print, and so on and so forth. I was told I couldn't do it alone because I could never leave anything in the van by itself.
That makes sense.
So I asked my good friend and roommate, Peter Dickerson, to go with me. So we made a trip of it. We started out early in the morning. We stopped in Connecticut, either on the way there or on the way back, to go to pick up a small print from a gallery of Isabel Bishop's work. All in all, we probably brought back 18 to 24 prints of well-known artists from almost as many galleries.
Wow.
We got back and we realized they didn't give us a key to bring it into the building. So we had everything in the van, and we brought it into our little tiny apartment and just laid everything around in the living room, saying, where do you want to put the Warhol?
Oh, that must have been cool.
So it was great. It was a fun moment.
Get any photos of that?
I wish we did. It wasn't like we all had cell phones back then. Right?
As I'm asking, I'm like, nobody had cell phones. You got to hope somebody had a Kodak or...
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't document it, but we made a call to the president's office in the morning, and he let us into the building. Everything was fine.
That is a cool story, man. That's quite the road trip.
Yeah. So anyway, one of the things that the students at Swain learned was how to hang a show, how to wire a painting, how to take the measurements, how to think about how one painting looked next to another. So I think that a bunch of us who were barely in our early 20s came out knowing how to hang a show. And we took it very seriously. And in the early days of Gallery X, we, of course, had to pay the rent, just as it still does. And back then, this was, again, the late 80s, the fee to be a member was $30 a month, which was problematic for some people still. Though I'm always kind of find it ironic that it's now cheaper to be a member of Gallery X than it was back then.
It is ironic. It is ironic. It's challenging, too.
Yes. So
A lot of challenges there.
yeah, Gallery X started out with a bunch of people, even though we were all colleagues and generally liked each other, we didn't always. There was always going to be personality clashes. Gallery X and Swain preceded it was a place where you made lifelong friends. Many people married other students, or
Any
had
faculty
relationships
student,
with.
any faculty student marriages?
Not that I recall, not marriages.
It was the 70s, right? Sounds like, so, okay.
So, in any case, gathering at Gallery X, this group of roughly 20 Swain students, a Swain alum, and a few others, the early meetings were kind of a nightmare. No one knew how to run a meeting. Everyone would sort of gather into little groups and chit-chat, and we were trying to figure out things about how to raise money and what's the next show going to be and what do we want to do. Every show was voted on back in those days. I'm not sure it's quite done that way anymore. I should make a side note here. I stopped being a member of Gallery X when I started writing art criticism because I didn't think it was appropriate for me to write about the gallery that I was a member of. So
Could be a conflict.
there's always the possibility of a conflict.
Tricky.
So I just chose to avoid it. My wife will tell you that she is the only artist in New Bedford who was never written about because she's married to the art critic.
Well, yeah, talk about a conflict of interest right there, right?
In any case, sitting around at one of these meetings, which if I remember correctly, they certainly seemed to be more than once a month back then, but maybe they were always once a month. But we were a little more active back then because I think we probably had a little more energy.
You're right.
But at one meeting, I got up to say something. There were no microphones. It was a small room, but you couldn't even get anyone's attention. It'd be 5 people over here chatting, and I remember standing up. And I still have a little bit of a temper, but I had a really
Is that right?
much bigger temper back then.
I hadn't heard about that.
And I stood up and basically said, "Everyone shut the fuck up."
Yeah.
And this is not a meeting. This is a cocktail party or something.
Right.
And Bob Maker, an integral part of the gallery, said, "Don's right." And the next week he came in with Robert's Rules of Order, how to run a meeting. And
Nice.
it changed everything.
Nice.
Raise your hand.
Yeah. We gotta bust out that Robert's Rules of Order again, I think.
So that kind of formalized how things were done, and it made us a much more effective organization.
Is that when you guys started to look at, we need to have an executive board, we need bylaws?
Well, it was pretty loose back then.
Was that when you guys moved to?
Well, yeah, I was out not living when the move happened. I was not living in New Bedford when
I was
the
going
move
to say
happened.
you were not living.
I was the undead. But I'll get to that.
Okay.
Early on, we just obviously knew we needed a few things, and we just created, without any formal paperwork or lawyers or anything else that usually ends up happening with this kind of situations, but we voted in a president, a vice president, a treasurer, and a secretary, and then the sort of loose PR person who was not necessarily the president. It was just someone who had the skills to figure out how to disseminate the information, and maybe decimate it.
Eventually.
Karen became, she actually created a little newspaper, the Bulletin X or X Bulletin. I
The
think
newsletter. Yeah, Christine was talking about that.
Yeah, that was around for a while, and it was, poetry was in it and little illustrations, and it was.
That should be brought back.
Yeah. So the gallery back then was not anything like the gallery is now. Part of it had to do with spatial limitations. I am of as much as I like the building that Gallery X is in right now, I was very fond of that little storefront space because it allowed for some really cool little intimate shows. So the way shows were selected back then is a member or several members get together and pitch this idea. Look, I would like to work with Dominique and Steve, and we're going to do a show together. And then you'd be asked, what's the show going to be about? And they almost always were themed. It was not ever just going to be anything that came through the door. And you generally sought out people in the group that I think it'd be fun to work with this guy or this woman and do, small shows. And I liked that. That space had about 3 little rooms within it. And it was I think of it more like it's almost like a little Manhattan gallery. You could pass from this space to that space. And it wasn't great for big shows, and we really never did big shows because it wasn't appropriate in that space. We did a show in 1992 that I organized that was called That Was Then, This Is Now. And it was almost everyone in the class of 1982 from Swain put in a piece, 2 pieces, one from them when they were students and one a contemporary piece. So that was a really fun show, and obviously very particular. So it wasn't just bringing a landscape. It was, we want to see something from 1982. We want to see something from and then 10 years later, 82 and 92. And I did a show with this woman, Dominique Mertens, who was a grad school colleague of mine. She was a Belgian woman who made little videos, and we set up a little room for her so she could have these videos continually playing. Oh, that's cool. And Steve Richardson, who now lives in New Orleans, a sort of big bombastic painter, and the show was called Parables, only because we all felt like we were telling stories in our work one way or another. I do remember an interesting thing with Steve. I was doing very big paintings at the time, and one of them was about 6 foot tall and 2 feet wide. It was basically a life-size portrait. And Steve had lots of paintings of varying sizes, but he happened to have one that was not much bigger than a postcard. And I said, Steve, I would like to hang this painting here, and I'd like you to put this little one right next to it. And he almost was a little offended, because he says, no one's even going to see my little painting there. Why would you want me to hang it over there? And I said, just trust me. And then we put it up, and he looked at it, he said, you wrote the sentence, I put the exclamation mark. So it worked.
It must have drawn people in more, maybe, right?
Yeah, you see this thing, now you're going to come closer to it.
Right, yeah, what is that?
Right,
yeah,
right.
That's brilliant.
Right, so yeah, there was some interesting things that happened in that space. Now, I left
Did you like the intimacy of the space?
Yeah, I thought it was great.
Plus, it sounds like the way you described it, you could have, like you just did, you could have varying things going on. The lady who did the videos in one room.
Right.
Yeah, so it adds dimension, kind of, I think.
Yeah, and it was open much the same hours as it is now. And yeah, like I said, the intimacy of it added to its charm. And it became like the thing. Up until Gallery X opened, the only gallery, I'm not talking about the galleries, say, in the Whaling Museum, which have art collections, but it's basically a history museum that has a pretty damn good collection of art, but it's not an art museum. There was very little else. There was a gallery at Swain, the Crapo Gallery, that And that was really it. You know?
Yeah, because that was one of the things I was going to talk to you about is the origin of why you guys decided we want to do our own thing. So was it out of necessity?
I think somewhat out of necessity, because there was, as there still is, a lot of alumni who came here from, Chuck's prime example, comes from Ohio, never leaves. But so the people who stayed here, you couldn't go just like, we're going to keep using Swain's gallery.
Yeah.
They had other students using the gallery.
Right.
So I think there was some thought to, we need to do something else. And even prior to Gallery X, there was something that was more studio space, but this was over on Acushnet Avenue behind the recently, once again, closed Freestones.
They mentioned that.
The 2nd Street Art Exchange.
Right.
Which was mostly workspace. So there were people over there doing sculpture or painting, and as you might imagine, the Rasta band or someone would be playing there, so a lot of self-taught musicians.
The Rasta band.
But then occasionally say, hey, let's have a show. And so it would be set up, and we'd put on a show. And I was part of that cooperative as well. So all this is happening. Gallery X is forming while I'm in my last year or year and a half of being in grad school.
And where was that again? I'm sorry.
That was UMass Dartmouth.
Okay, yep.
So, and my studio was in the big Purchase Street building, the big brick building near the Octopus, beyond the Octopus. And when I was in school, is where I met the woman I would eventually marry. A little side story, but a kind of interesting one. There was a professor who taught at UMass named Peter London. Peter taught a class called Painting from Within, and frankly, with no disrespect to Peter, it's a class I never would have taken, except that I needed the 3 credits. And the reason that I decided to I took the class, and what I was resistant about was my entire approach to making art was about looking and drawing, as opposed to drawing what I felt in my soul.
Oh, I see.
And that's what Peter was about. He had a sort of very more sort of spiritual, and I don't mean that in a religious way, but
I understand.
Kind of emotional sensibility. In any case, I took the class, and I was the only grad student in the class, or maybe 20 undergrads. And about less than a month after the semester started, I got a phone call from Peter. I remember being a little startled that he was calling me on a home line, and thinking, how did this guy even get my number? I said, well, of course he works in the university. But he called me and asked, he told me he had been involved in an accident, not a horrible accident, but enough to put him out of work for 3 months, 4 months.
Oh, wow.
A back injury. And as the doctors advised, you should just be on your back for a while. So he called me mostly because I was the only grad student in there, and probably 10 years older than most of them. So he thought, can you teach the class? And I said, sure, what's the syllabus? He said, did you read the book? I said, yeah. He said, you're good. So he didn't really give me a syllabus, and I kind of winged it.
Nice.
And we did some kind of crazy, there would be times I'd be working in my studio. I think that class was twice a week. My studio was downtown, and the class was taught in the North Dartmouth campus. So at 45 minutes before I had to teach, I'd jump in my car and be driving up thinking, what the hell am I going to do today? I started out by trying to stay true to his spirit and not set up a landscape or get a nude in there, just to just do what Peter wanted me to do. I started bringing in a boombox and tapes and kind of talking about people about what the music makes them feel, which I didn't want them to necessarily illustrate it. If it's a love song, I don't necessarily need to see a couple kissing.
Right. And what year was this roughly?
This would have been the late 80s, 89
cool.
or thereabouts.
Cool. And so this is at what was SMU still, right?
That was also in transition at that time. I can tell you about
That's
that.
when I was there. I was there from 85 till about 90.
So I'll tell you about one other thing I did. I was driving up, and I have no idea what I'm going to do today. And then as I was passing Shaw's, I pulled into the parking lot and went in and grabbed a bunch of stuff, a lemon, an onion, a Hershey bar. And when I got into the class, I dumped everything on the table. As people came in, I said, come in and grab something. And some people would run over because they saw the Hershey bar, but there was somebody who had to have the onion or jalapeno or whatever else. And I said, whatever you got off that table, I want you to take a bite out of it now. And they sort of reluctantly did. Well, some were like, oh, great, I'm going to have a blueberry muffin. But,
Right.
You know, and then I asked them to draw, I had these big pieces of paper and charcoal or whatever else I gave them. I want them to draw what that felt like. And again, if that's something you had was sour, I want you to draw sourness, but I didn't want you to draw the lemon itself. So it's a much more of a
Yeah, you really have to dig.
So then, as we're getting about halfway through, and we're going to have a 10-minute coffee break, I'm like, these guys are getting pretty close to being done, and now I still have an hour and a half. So when they got back, I asked them to take all the pieces, and they were all going to work together and make a salad with their ingredients.
That's brilliant.
So they all over the wall.
Oh, that's great.
But in retrospect, it seemed to me, I shouldn't even say in retrospect, I even knew it then. It was just BS to me. It was just, not that they weren't learning something, but
Right.
I was just totally winging it.
You were, but that's definitely getting them in touch with trying to interpret feelings and putting it out on some kind of medium.
Yeah.
So, that's a great exercise, I think. You
So-
were definitely winging it, but I think
I think it worked.
in
ultimately.
his spirit, it sounds like,
Yeah.
so...
I mean, I wanted to not just go in there and, like I said, set up a still life, because that's not what he would have done.
Right.
So, but I wasn't him.
True,
So,
true. It's a bit of an adjustment for the students, too, to go from all of a sudden, there's your professor, and now he's gone, and the guy who's been sitting next to you is running the class.
yeah. So I'll address something about the transition of Swain to SMU to UMass Dartmouth. So I'm going to fudge some of these months and years a little bit, but so I graduated in '82. I think it was around 1986 that the program in Artscope came from Boston University. So Swain traditionally, from the late 60s onward, had 4 possible majors: painting, printmaking, sculpture, and graphic design. The PIA program, which consisted of at least 8, maybe 9 or 10 people who came down from Boston University. And the PIA program in Artscope brought in 4 new majors: woodworking, fine furniture and the like, fabric design, surface design, looms, a lot of weaving, all that sort of stuff. A great ceramics program, a metal smithing, jewelry program as well. There's some debate about why that even ever happened, and I kind of think I know the inside scoop from various people I've talked to over the years. There was a gentleman who has long since passed in an automobile accident, but he was the president of Swain at the time, Bruce Yanawine, who was a very controversial figure and largely disliked by the student population. But the story I heard is at a cocktail party, he met John Silber, who was the president of BU at the time. And they started talking, and Silber, didn't give a damn about the program as Artscope. He just thought it was a big waste of space. Having these big art, obviously the Star Store building is kind of the same story. It's, you need a lot of space, you have lots of expensive equipment, and I think he was like, this could be turned into a dorm. This could be, instead of doing this. So in any case, somehow a deal was worked out, and the Swain School of Design absorbed the PIA. It may have also been the beginning in my opinion, of the downfall. Not because the people they brought in weren't great. Chris Guston is a world-renowned ceramicist, and he taught there for years, and he came from the PIA. Alphonse Mattia, who was, again, an internationally known woodworker, came in, and people would come for these guys, and
Nice.
Men and women. Barbara Goldberg and Barbara Eckhart, who ran the textile department, the two barbers. So it has nothing to do with saying that they didn't bring value to the school, but suddenly you were paying double the number of faculty, and the student body barely increased. So it's like a disaster, a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot of hustling back then. There were some buildings that Swain owned. Everyone knows the big Rodman building on County and Hawthorne, and the Melville, some people call the Whale House and all stuff. Those are like well-known buildings, but also lots of weird buildings they owned, like an old post office depot, over on Elm Street, and
Really?
So property started getting sold off. And, anyway, while this is all happening, I think they realize how deep they're in, and that even selling property is not going to save them. So I don't know who initiated it, but then came, maybe we should merge with SMU. So, which was not necessarily anything that the faculty at SMU wanted. They, there was always some sort of, I wouldn't say any bitter rivalry or anything. There were some people who actually worked in both places. A guy named Kurt Wisniewski taught both printmaking at Swain and at UMass, or SMU. And he did that for a couple of years anyway. So I think it was an awkward courtship. Like what, Swain had its own very interesting way of doing things, and SMU was quite different. So I'm going to swing this back to the class I was teaching, because the woman I married was in that class.
Okay.
So, and she and I have talked. She lived at home. She lived at home with her parents in Fairhaven. So she was a commuter student, which many SMU students were.
Right.
It basically was started as a commuter school. And that made her experience very different than my experience. If I was throwing a party now, no one would come from her class. I would have 20, my daughter's getting married in 2 weeks, and half the wedding party, half the people attending the wedding are Swain colleagues. So the intimacy that we had at Swain was not something that my wife ever experienced, because she was going home every day. So she had 3 bridesmaids who were all fellow students, but they retained the relationships over the years.
Right.
Anyway, the reason I bring that all up is she, the merger did some interesting things. So there were people who started there as freshmen, and they were Swain students, and they wanted a Swain diploma. It was important for them to get a Swain diploma. There were some students, I believe, from the PIA program who, and I don't think they got their way on this, because I think Boston University wasn't going to allow it, but though they started out at BU and they followed down to New Bedford to go with the faculty that they loved, here in New Bedford as opposed to Boston. But I don't think BU was interested in relenting, saying, we'll still give you the BU degree. It's like, it's not part of this school anymore.
Right.
My wife started out at SMU, and then they were changing the name to UMass Dartmouth. There was a very interesting point there that depending on what year you started, you could ask for your degree to be from the Swain School of Design, SMU, or UMass Dartmouth.
That is interesting. And I vaguely remember that
Yep.
because my mother she went to Swain for a little while
Yep.
before you did. And I was artistically inclined, and she had wanted me to go there until these things that you just spoke of started to take place. And the push was for me to go to SMU. At the time, I graduated from high school in '85.
Yep.
And I remember there being capitulating about degrees.
Right.
And there were people who had gone to Swain who wanted a Swain degree, understandably too.
As a matter of fact, we printed in 1982. There's some argument about when when Swain actually started, because people were thinking. I mean, I know when the school started. It started in 1981, but there's. It wasn't like we think of it now as 4-year degrees. So it was more back in the day, in the pre-World War II. There's some talk about Swain used to be a finishing school. I don't know how true that is. Basically, where you would send your daughters to learn how to play piano and do a little watercolor and speak
Really?
Latin, so that you
Wow.
could attract a husband. It
Quite
was
possible.
again in the
Yeah.
late 1870s and 80s. And through much of its, as it gets into the last century, then they started offering classes like sign painting, even like doing posters for department stores. Some dress up for sale. Those were
Really?
actual classes there. There was sort of a fashion design thing going on. Lots of sort of the precursor to graphic design, which was back then called commercial art. So a lot of that stuff happening, and right up until the late 50s, early 60s, that was the program. Until David Leffler Smith came in, and he decided that he would somehow make this a world-class art school. And there's some interesting things that happen out of that too. So Sig Haynes, who you probably know, at least know by reputation and by his paintings, he probably more than anyone else in Swain history probably has the longest history at the school, because he started there as a boy doing Saturday morning classes,
Oh, is that right?
then went to college there, then went to Yale and got a degree, which is also, I'll tie that story back in, and then he becomes a faculty member at Swain, and then merges with SMU, UMass, and that's where he retires from. But he applied. He wanted to go to Yale, and he applied to Yale, and he was accepted on the strength of his work. But he didn't have any of the credentials that they needed him to have. Like, well, you didn't have. Have you had Western civilization? Have you sort of the basics, right?
Civics, whatever.
So they agreed to accept him, but he had to work with people at Swain and at SMU to promise that they would find a way to get him a BFA, even if it meant sending him to SMU to do it. So he had to go there and take those kind of supportive classes. And Swain, I guess, and Sig, when he was in Yale, and he took all those classes, he'd do them in the summer, so, and he was there during the Vietnam War, and he was a conscientious objector who worked in an emergency room, so.
Wow.
But one day, someone knocks at his dorm door and says, looking for Severin Haynes? And he says, that's me. And he says, I don't know what this thing is, and it's like, it's a BFA from Swain School of Design. So they carried that through, and then he was actually the first person to ever get a BFA from Swain. But then lots of his colleagues and people immediately followed, like, we want to do this too. So then that started, like, what do we have to do with the state so we can have a fully accredited school so that the students can get bachelor's degrees instead of some
Certificate. Right. Very cool. Yeah. That's interesting. That's one thing that in doing these, my interest has been piqued about Swain because, this is a Gallery X documentation project, but as I explained before, my mom went there briefly, and so many people. This history is totally foreign to me, what you're talking about, so thank you.
Sure. And there was also this, when the merger happened, Swain faculty, they had a sort of informal union always at the school. But they had to go sit down with people at SMU, including their faculty and the people who are going to administrate. How does this thing happen? Does it happen? Are we just going to cancel the whole deal? And there was lots of heated moments. You know,
Yeah.
I'll leave the PIA out of this part because I don't know exactly how that all flowed into it. But certainly the people that I was most familiar with, Sig and David Leffler Smith, Dick Doherty, who was another painting instructor and also had been an alumni of the school, Robin Taffler, who was a sculptor. Dick and Robin married. They live in Kentucky now. There was Ben Martinez and Jackie Block, who were husband and wife. There was Mark St. Pierre and John Osborne, who were printmaking majors, and they were all at these meetings to get this stuff going along.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who studied with David Smith knew that one of his favorite lines, and everyone will tell you, it was, "Know when to shut up." And he was talking about drawing. Like, you shouldn't have done that. You should have stopped. Right? You ruined it now. But Sig told me a story that, Sig was kind of a spokesman for the Swain faculty in these meetings. And he told me that he was getting into this heated argument with someone. And he says, "I can feel the blood rushing in my head." And he's like, I know. I'm thinking, if I don't shut up, they're just going to shut down this whole meeting. They might just tell us deals off. But anyway, he's like, and he says he's just about to explode, and he feels his hand on his thigh, and it's David Smith sitting next to him. And he says he didn't say anything; he just squeezed. And I said to him, "You know what David was telling you? Know when to shut up."
Right. It's a valuable lesson.
Right. And yes, it was an absolutely eclectic group of people with, there were 5, during the years I was there, 5 painting instructors always.
Mm-hmm.
At least 2 printmakers at any given time. I'm talking about faculty, 2 sculptors at any given time, and 2 to 3 graphic designers. Sometimes it'd be some, they had a photography teacher would come in, which was not a major, but it was something that was important to the graphic design community to have a photographer there. I mean, back in the late 70s, we had 1 computer for the whole students. You have to sign up for it 2 weeks at a time.
Is that right?
Yeah. So
it does sound. I mean, what I've experienced talking to some of the folks who went there and went through the transition. The sad part was that intimacy you talked about was really lost. People living in each other's apartments down here. This area, the little, makeshift campus you guys pretty much developed on the fly, really kind of went out the window when it went up there, which is sad. And you touched upon at the beginning how it's somewhat reminiscent to the Star Store debacle that took place this past year.
I think that those people, it was in the news again this week. It will probably continue to be in the news.
The more you stir it, man.
Yeah. And Fallon Navarro is a hero. I think she is absolutely going to be one of the future leaders of the Bedford Arts. She came from Arizona with a baby and her mom and her husband, and she was going to, I'm staying here forever. So she's gonna dig her heels in. She's gonna ride it out.
Yeah.
And I think she's gonna, like I said, she's gonna be a real leader in the art community down the road.
Yeah.
She already is, but even more so.
It's needed.
Yeah.
It's needed.
I think that certainly people like Chuck and John and myself and Barbara Worthington was the president of Gallery X for a while. I was the president of Gallery X for a while. There's been lots of presidents over there. You've been one, right? So. But at some point, we're just the old guard at this point. I have always, and John and Chuck have been there continuously. They're the only 2 guys who never left. I was a member until I moved to Vermont for 15 years, and then when I came back, I said, I should join Gallery X again. So then that was when I became president. But I've always thought if when Chuck goes, it's who's going to step in his place, and I think that what they really need to be doing is developing the next, nurturing is a better word than developing, nurturing that next group of young artists who are coming up. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, there's always the danger of it becoming a cult of personality. So, but it shouldn't be. It should be flawless. Flawless is not the word I'm looking for. It should just be a smooth transition to whoever's up and coming, you know?
It should be, I think, but you have, it's like your baby. It's like, so there's that element of relinquishing
Sure.
control,
Sure.
which can be a point of contention
Sure.
with people involved.
For newer people, yeah.
Yeah, to the point where.
Oh, I know people who've come and gone. Like,
Right.
just,
And we've had our disagreements, and but it's also, it's one of these things where that's the way it is there. So you take it with a grain of salt if you want to be a part of it. And there are worse things too. I mean, and understandably, it is kind of, they've had it for so long. Trusting someone else to take it or start to change it, or something that they're reluctant to do, but also very willing to do because they don't want to make any waves.
And,
Case in point,
yep.
the change of the public hanging to now the public
Yes.
exhibition, which was,
It was. I think it was absolutely needed, and I wasn't even aware of it until suddenly the name was changed, and Karen, who's who I mentioned before, she's the one who used that great analogy of the mass shooting, because it was just.
yeah, but a mass shooting would never be a clever name for any
Of
any
course,
show.
I'm saying, but
So to me, the public hanging, the term, was clever. And it was used for 33 years
Yes.
with no one raising an eyebrow whatsoever. Until somebody tried to make the connection with it being a race issue because of Black Lives Matter, and they specifically mentioned that. And I could see if it was called the public lynching,
yeah.
but a public...
Well, I may have been the person who rose, because I've written about it at least twice.
Yeah.
But, there was a point, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years ago, I could actually find it, because I could research my own writing. But there was a public hanging opening that was happening, and as you probably know, it's always the same weekend as the Portuguese feast, and it's always 105 degrees in the gallery.
Right.
And someone actually had a noose hanging from a rafter.
Really?
And I don't know who the artist was. I'm not even sure I'd call the person an artist, but it was someone, because it's an open show, someone just going to come in, and again, maybe they thought it was just clever.
Right.
But, I walked in, I was like, that's kind of a little, if nothing else, at least a little distasteful, even if it's not. But while this was all going on, and I mentioned the heat because I swear half the people that were in the opening were outside because it's too hot to hang out.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy comes running in to the building, a well-dressed black man in, a suit, and he grabs the noose, yanks it down. He's laughing like crazy. He runs out, jumps into the sports car with New York plates, and takes off. And a lot of people can attest to the story because so many people saw it. And I, for a minute, thought, is this performance art? Was this like...
Right.
Is he part of this?
Right.
But no one ever no one knew who the guy was. He didn't come,
He clearly knew the rope was there.
He must have been into the gallery earlier, or someone said, But anyway, he just... And that thing came down pretty easily. It wasn't like, he was struggling to get the thing off the route.
It sounds like he knew. He knew it was there. He knew exactly what to do.
Yeah. But no one, it's never been explained who he was, why he did it, whether he thought, but I made a point of that he was laughing because I think he wasn't in there like screaming at people like, what the hell's wrong with you people? It was,
What's that?
I almost think he was the Joker or something, just coming in and doing this kind of, it's just a little anarchy,
Yeah. Well, times change, people's opinions change, things change. I think, when we resist change, we suffer the most, whether it's...
And the public hanging thing, I think, and you mentioned lynching, of course, that's the first thought.
I could see, people being offended, but public hangings were done with whites, blacks,
Right,
criminals.
Exactly. But I'm not even sure it was coming from necessarily the black community. I don't know who this person?
It was someone who wasn't from the black community, but who was
an ally.
Was using Black Lives Matter as the basis for the complaint.
But hanging is still used for political murder all the time. It's the second highest rate weapon for suicide after a gun. You know, I mean, hanging in and of itself is a horrific thing.
It can bring, yeah. It was just odd that for years, over 30 years, it had been going on and nobody had batted an eye. And just the year before, we'd had the biggest submission of works.
Well, you know, I was watching a Richie Gervais thing last night, and half his thing is about this word that I used to be able to say I can't. And I think he's great, but he's saying you can't predict at any moment. Well, the word we're using now, 10 years from now, like, what the hell were you guys thinking? Because we can't read the future.
Well, and then you have people, too, who they're now being canceled because of things they did 10, 15 years ago that was acceptable, you know. So it's a strange world we live in.
Yeah.
You know, we could go on for forever, Don, but we're a little bit over our time.
Okay.
But let's get together again,
Absolutely.
maybe not with the microphones, and have a talk.
Absolutely.
Because this was fun, and I feel like we're kind of...
I don't know if we talked too much about Gallery X itself, because we're so much...
Well, you know what, to be honest with you, like, I've gotten a lot of history. Zach, the new director over there, he had so much history. So to get into more of the personal feelings and to really get into the Swain aspect, I haven't been able to cover it all, really.
Yeah.
So this was really great.
Yeah.
Good content.
Cool.
So thank you so much for coming, everybody. It's an honor to have Don Wilkinson here in the recording booth, if you will. And stay tuned for our next guest and our next podcast. This has been Sean FitzGerald, the South Coast Artists Index Group for the Gallery X Documentation Project. You have a swell day.
You have been listening to the South Coast Artist Index Gallery X series. This series and the documentation project was made possible by ArtNet and Wicked Cool Places, funded by the City of New Bedford through the American Rescue Plan Awards and its Arts, Culture, and Tourism Fund, and is facilitated by New Bedford Creative at the NBEDC.